So what do we mean by this word diversity? Everybody keeps talking about this word, but often we don't even know what that means. It's become such a buzzword. In the past 10 years, all we hear is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I was just looking at the new definition yesterday, post-MAGA coming to power. DEI means they didn't earn it. They do not deserve our time. So before we move into that space, let's understand what diversity is in the first place. Yeah, you can see the usual definitions about heterogeneity, how we need to have different people being shown, all of that. For us, I think the one that's at the bottom, the fact that diversity refers to human differences is what is important for us. Yeah. And it's not just about race and ethnicity. It is about points of view. It is about gender, identity, cultural practices, all kinds of things that are so complex and layered that it's very hard to really say, oh, I've managed to bring in diversity in all my work or in workplaces or in media and all that. So looking at how can we talk about this, when we say diversity in media, we are talking about, first of all, ownership. Today, a lot of the media is owned by media oligarchs, not even moguls. In our days, we used to talk about media barons and media moguls. Today, it's become media oligarchs. These guys control varied business interests and literally want to run the world. So whether they're owning television stations, factories, industries, all of that, but also they want to control our mind, and all the more propelled by technology. And the tech guys are the ones today at the top of the media chain. And so that is something we really need to worry about. Yeah? Second, when we say sources, the previous speaker was talking about who gets to tell their stories. So who do we approach? What are we talking about? Are we talking about informed consent? Are we asking people, can we tell your stories? Or do we have the right, just because we have this mic and a camera and all of that, just go and start filming, just start writing because I have the power? Or do we give the people the power on their stories and who gets to tell their stories and how and where? Which leads us to what that content will be. How is this story being told? Is it being told from a very defined format where they say, this is a success story, so we'll push this success story? Or are we showing it as an experience of that individual and allowing them to control the tone of that story? Right? And then we move, I'm just going to quickly go all over these points, but very quickly. Yeah? So what are those formats? In what forms are we telling these stories? In what media? In what media formats? How do we tell this? Who has access to these stories? Whom are we allowing to read these stories? Because access is also about affordability. Who can afford to access that particular medium? Who can afford to bring those stories to us and who can read those stories, right? Which means then, we are then moving into perspectives and what the goals of each of those people with different perspectives presenting those stories. Look at the number of mics, this is nothing, it's just a representation, right? But every time you watch anyone talking online, it's either a single mic, which means then it is that one perspective being presented, or it is multiple mics, but the perspective still stays the same. It's just one perspective, even though there are multiple mics. The sound bites are going to be tweaked just a little to adapt to the agenda of that particular media outlet. But ultimately, it is that one unidimensional perspective only that is being presented. So are we really getting to see the truth, or are we getting only a minuscule part of the truth that they would allow you to see, right? So somewhere we are also looking at, are all these media formats naturally, organically coming out, or are they pre-packaged? Most of them are pre-packaged. I'm sure when you study, your faculty will teach you about hot media and cool media and all of that stuff. Today, there is no hot media. There is no room for you to decide as an audience what you want to see or how you want to respond. A lot of it is pre-packaged, designed, and just thrown at you. You're expected to be passive, not an audience alone. You're a passive consumer. There's a big difference between those two words, but that's what we've become. We've become passive consumers, right? So a lot of times, media houses also live in echo chambers. They just keep talking to the same people again and again and again. So rarely getting younger or newer audiences to reach out to them. We heard this, right? What are we supposed to do? We are doing all that we are doing. We are giving you all the information. But how are you packaging that? You're packaging it in a world that is today very different. It is not what it was 30 years ago. It is not what it was 40 years ago. Not even what it was 2 years ago. Yeah? Everything is shifting. Every single day it's shifting. Today, last month, we had the Hindu Lit for Life short story competition with the promise that the best award-winning short story will be made into a short film. Sitting on the jury, I get 1,700 entries, and I'm really very excited because I think, oh my, so many creative minds sending so many entries. And then I kept getting stories which had Clara as the protagonist. And I'm like, who is Clara? All these people are writing from Chennai and from Raipur and from Delhi, and what is this? Who is this Clara in so many stories? So we ran it through Quillbot. We ran it through 2-3 detection software, and then we found we had to throw out at least 1,200 of those entries. Yeah? But it made my job easier. I had fewer stories to go through and decide the winner. Whether that's going to be made into a film or not, we're not yet sure, but because the director has to approve of it. So yeah, in an increasingly top-down kind of media practice, we want to do what we are all talking about when we say media diversity. We want to do counter narratives. We want to counter the overarching dominant narratives that are there. The second word that we are talking about in this session is representation. So what is representation? Diversity on the one hand, and then we're talking about representation. Representation is the symbolic way in which we present an identity or an idea or an ideology to audiences. Yeah? How are we representing it? We talk about also representing someone. So we were talking about whose story is being told by whom. So we have, on the one hand, we have someone like P. Sainath who has Pari. Anybody heard of Pari? And what Pari is? People's Archive of Rural India. Yes, very nice to know that you are aware. Good for you. But again, who is telling those stories? Have any of you accessed Pari? Are you listening to the stories? It started out with a very good intention that we want people to tell their own stories. But often the way it is presented has become very similar. It can't be that people all tell stories the same way. Yeah? When we talk to each other and when we are saying, okay, how did you get here to the venue? Each of us has a different story. Each of us has a different way of saying. Some of us will start with, I woke up in the morning and had a coffee and rushed out. Or someone else is going to say, I got stuck in traffic. So there's different ways we tell these stories, right? But these stories are now beginning to sound the same. Which means somewhere it is the technology that is deciding how we tell our stories, whatever those stories are. So how are we representing? We in the media, those of us who want to become media practitioners, have to keep that last line in mind. You are speaking, acting, and you're going to be officially there for another person or a group of people, and you are presenting for them. You're not presenting your notion about them. You're not presenting your perspective. You're supposed to be representing them. There's a big difference. Unfortunately, we have very bad examples with representatives in our country and elsewhere across the world. Yeah? So what is media representation? What do we want when we say diversity and representation in the media? We want portrayals that are aware of differences about nuances, that each individual or each group has specific identities, cultural practices, beliefs, value systems, all of that we want to present. Do we want to have issues that are presented? Yes. But at the same time, within a particular context, without explaining someone's context, you cannot talk about issues. Right? So always keeping track of In what milieu am I telling this story, and to whom am I telling this story? What context is that of the audience also in mind as we keep, which means that side, the words that are there, are what should guide us. We're supposed to be non-judgmental. We're supposed to remove our inherent biases, unconscious biases, remove them, and be sensitive and fair to the people's story that we are telling. Yeah? It talks about, we are talking about multiple program formats and multiple ways of telling those stories. Yeah. These are the standard functions of the media that we all talk about when we first start studying journalism and media studies, and we say we all want to go out there and bring about massive changes in the society, because we put ourselves in this superior position, like I know what is the problem in this society and I want to correct it. And these are all our jobs as the media, right? But again, she referred to it in the previous talk. We are aware that all said and done, between the global north and the global south, the western hemisphere and the eastern hemisphere, we have an imbalance of flow of information and images often. I do have 3 videos, but they are all on YouTube, and I don't think we have a net connection that can enable that immediately, because they are also dealing with other tech issues. So I'm not going to play those videos. But the fact that gender gets the least representation in many ways. We have a Women's Day, we have gender studies, we have people talking about gender and women, but often it is only one type of imaging and icons that we hold up for people to follow about women's success stories. People of color in the US, Europe, China, Russia, Scandinavian countries all suffer from this problem. The people of color are not getting the true representation of their lived realities on media. They have representation which is required of them, but not really with a purpose of telling their story. So for instance, even if you have something like Wakanda, and all African Americans are rallying around Wakanda, a lot of it is about profiteering. It is about using the black alignment to African nation and using that to make money with spin-off merchandise and whatnot, right? People were all dressed up like the Wakanda tribe. So these are all small things for us to start thinking about. I don't need to tell you too much about LGBTQIA and how they are also stereotypically represented across media. Hopefully that changes with social media, or that's what we think, because many of them have become social media influencers and have these reels and stuff that they put up. But what happens is, again, people with disabilities, same thing. We have now newer ways of being more sensitive to disabilities, but again, a lot is left to be desired. The colonized people of Africa, the South America, Australia, Asia, all the global south, literally if you look below the equator, all of us have been colonized by Europeans and Americans. We have still not learned to remove that colonial baggage from our news values and our news reporting and our media practices. So what is happening? Today the movement in Europe, again, how interesting is that? These were the biggest colonizers, but they talk about dismantling the colonial gaze. And I'm in my head going, you don't know anything about what it is to be the oppressed part of the colonial game. So what are you telling me why I should dismantle or how I should dismantle that gaze? So the gaze becomes very important for us. What is that gaze that we are applying? What are the lenses we are applying to our cameras, to our mics, to our pens, and to our keyboards? What are those lenses that we need to start using? Instead of the mind lens that we need to shift. Instead of that, we are only trying to use words and language to cover up all of that. So we need to start thinking about that. The marginalized, religious minorities, social minorities, cultural minorities, all of that. Standard stories, we've been hearing about this, that there's always a stereotypical way of presenting the marginalized stories. We also know that today, because of globalization, supposed liberalization, supposed development of the entire world, we still have many issues. We still have the disenfranchised. We barely hear about them. How many of you know where the first Indian national flag was hoisted in India on Indian soil and when? Can anybody tell me? I can hear some sound over there, but I'm not sure if they're talking about the answer. Yeah, tell me. Which year? 1960. Indian tricolor after independence. Indian national flag, first time hoisted on Indian soil. 1942 in Manipur on the border, because Subhash Chandra Bose and his INA enter India with the help of the Japanese through Burma into Manipur. They hoist the flag. There's a beautiful space there where they still hoist the flag every single day. 1942, before we gained independence, the tricolor was up there. How many of us know this story? We will never get to know this story. Why? Because we never represent the seven sisters of the Northeast in mainstream media. If we do, we only show them as violent tribes, internecine warfare, struggles, conflicts, those kinds of things. We never show them in a positive light. We never show them in a prideful manner. Yeah? That is no diversity in our media. That is no representation. Forget marginalized stories being told. There is no mention of this anywhere. You don't know unless you go to Manipur. Yeah? How many of us will go to Manipur? Today we had 3 guests who were invited from everywhere in the world, Iran, Germany, for the film festival. They didn't come because there is an advisory by their government saying, please don't go to Manipur, there's violence, you're likely to get killed. I spent 5 days. Absolutely no problems. Everything is peaceful. Of course, the chief minister resigned while I was there. But the point I'm trying to make is, we don't even do mind travel to these places because the media does not do it or doesn't deem it important enough for us to know these things. Yeah? So who gets to decide all of this? Is the media for entertainment? Is it for empowerment? Does it endanger? Does it elevate? These are some questions for you to think about. Like I said, the Seven Sisters, we hear about the women's struggle. The video I had was Iram Sharmila giving up her 16-year protest. How many of us know today she doesn't have a home? This is a woman who stood there and fought for her people. She doesn't have a home because nobody cares. Media doesn't care to follow up her story. Yeah, there's no follow-up, which is the biggest issue in our representation politics in media. Africa, nobody is talking, everybody is talking about Ghana, everybody is talking, everybody is talking about Gaza, everybody is talking about Ukraine, but nobody is talking about Ghana. Why? It doesn't suit American interests or Russian interests or Europe's interests to talk about this war, which is a direct result of oppressive colonialism by European countries. They will spotlight only what they want to spotlight, not what needs to be spotlighted. Yeah? I'll wind up soon. So the idea of tokenism, erasure of trans lives, all of these are also things we need to start discussing. Othering is the easiest game that media plays while paying token respect to diversity and representation. What do? They will villainize some communities. They will what is the word I'm looking for? They make some communities seem like they're violent or disruptive, right? So these are all identity politics that are played on screen, in television, in film, in social media, in legacy media, as we call newspapers and so on. Blaming becomes the easiest way. We keep blaming everybody else. I'm getting out of that. We keep blaming everybody else. We keep saying, you have to do this, you have to do this. I think it starts with you. Each one of us has to remove all these biases and lenses, start looking at the world differently and saying, what do I want as an audience? Do I want to be a consumer or do I want to be an active audience? If so, what kind of stories will I support? What kind of stories do I want to hear? Become active audiences. I think that is where we start, because then the media will listen. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.